Vorthak the Endless possessed the kind of scars that made diplomats nervous and admirals jealous. Half his exoskeleton bore the elegant tracery of plasma burns, while his left mandible clicked against a titanium replacement every time he spoke, which, at the Meridian Point Academy's graduation gala, was constantly. The hegemony fleet at Keyless Prime thought they were clever. He rumbled to the circle of alien dignitaries, his neural implants casting blue light across his battle-worn carapace. 17 dreadnoughts in a gravity well formation, standard Taraxian doctrine, textbook positioning. Ambassador Keelnoth, whose species had invented the gravity well tactic, shifted uncomfortably in his ceremonial robes. And you defeated them? Defeated? Vorthak's mandibles spread in what passed for a grin among his kind. I made their formation irrelevant. See, they expected a frontal assault. He gestured with one primary arm, while his secondary limbs traced tactical movements in the air. But I had studied their manual. Chapter 7, Subsection 12. They would concentrate fire on the largest threat signature. The crowd leaned closer. Even the Zephyrian trade representatives, who typically found military discussions tedious, seemed captivated by the Kethamori champion's casual dissection of galactic naval doctrine. So I gave them the largest signature they'd ever seen, Vorthak continued, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. My ship, broadcasting on every frequency, engines at maximum burn, charging straight at their center line. Suicidal, breathed Admiral Zareth, her crystalline features reflecting the station's ambient lighting. Sensible, Vorthak corrected. While they focused their entire battle line on one target, my real fleet, invisible, engines cold, flanked through the asteroid field. By the time they realized their mistake, I had already disabled their command ship and captured their admiral. The assembled dignitaries erupted in appreciative clicks, whistles, and whatever passed for applause in their respective cultures. Vorthak basked in the attention, his battle computer automatically cataloging the engagement data for the 1,000th time. Over 97% of viewers here are watching without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the journey. Every click helps us grow stronger, and you'll never miss the next epic story. Victory number 643, he announced proudly. All cataloged, all verified by independent military observers. 1,000 battles across 17 star systems, and not a single defeat. Remarkable, said Commander Helix, whose people had fought the Kethamori 3 centuries ago. Your tactical database must be legendary. Every engagement analyzed, Vorthak confirmed, tapping the neural ports along his skull. Victory conditions, casualty reports, strategic analyses, all preserved for posterity and training purposes. In the corner of the reception hall, largely ignored by the crowd of military officers and diplomatic personnel, Professor Valdez continued grading midterm examinations with the methodical precision of someone who had done this particular task far too many times. Her stylus moved across the digital papers in steady strokes, occasionally pausing to add a comment or correct a tactical miscalculation. Professor, called out Captain Zexhai, one of the Academy's younger instructors, surely you must be impressed by our guest's accomplishments. Valdez glanced up from her work, her expression as neutral as her tone. Oh, very systematic. Organization is important in any profession. The comment drew a few chuckles from the crowd, though whether they were laughing with her or at her remained unclear. Vorthak, however, seemed less amused. You seem underwhelmed, he observed, his optical sensors focusing on the human instructor. Perhaps your species lacks appreciation for military excellence. We appreciate efficiency, Valdez replied, returning to her papers. Though we might define it differently. Vorthak's mandibles clicked against his titanium replacement, a sign those familiar with Kethamori psychology knew of rising irritation. And what, exactly, would a civilian academic know about military efficiency? Probably nothing, Valdez agreed cheerfully. I only taught strategy here for 15 years before switching to comparative military history. Much quieter department. Strategy? Vorthak's interest sharpened. Then you must have studied the great campaigns. The Siege of Antares, perhaps? The Breakdown Wars? Among others? And your own combat experience? Valdez paused in her grading, considering the question with the same attention she might give a particularly challenging exam answer. Oh, I only fought in one battle. The reception hall fell into the kind of silence that precedes either profound revelation or spectacular embarrassment. Several species began making soft sounds that, while varying widely in pitch and timbre, all conveyed barely suppressed amusement. One battle? Ambassador Keelnoth's voice carried the delicate mockery that only seasoned diplomats could manage. How unfortunate that your military career was so brief. Indeed, added Admiral Zareth. Perhaps your species simply lacks the constitution for extended warfare. Valdez looked up from her papers again, her expression unchanged. Perhaps. Vorthak studied the human with the same tactical assessment he applied to enemy formations. Small frame, no visible augmentations, hands soft from years of academic work rather than weapon handling. Her casual dismissal of his achievements suddenly made sense. She literally had no frame of reference for understanding military excellence. This single battle, he said, his tone shifting to something approaching pity. Was it at least significant? A planetary defense, perhaps? Or merely a border skirmish? Significant enough, Valdez replied, making another notation on a student's tactical analysis of the Proxima campaign. Though I suppose that depends on your perspective. Try me. Valdez set down her stylus and gave Vorthak her full attention for the first time since the conversation began. You've catalogued 1,000 victories across 17 systems. Correct. And you're proud of that record, as any warrior should be. Of course. Valdez nodded thoughtfully. You must have faced some truly formidable opponents. The hegemony fleet you mentioned. How many casualties did they suffer in your victory? Vorthak's battle computer supplied the data instantly. Approximately 47,000 military personnel. Minimal civilian casualties, as the engagement took place in deep space. 47,000, Valdez repeated, in a single engagement. That must have been difficult. For a moment, Vorthak seemed uncertain whether she was mocking him or expressing genuine sympathy. War is never easy, Professor. But necessary victories sometimes require heavy prices. Oh, I understand completely. Valdez picked up her stylus again, but continued speaking while reviewing the next paper. It's just interesting, the way different species approach these things. Your 1,000 battles, all those careful records, all those tactical analyses. Very thorough. Thoroughness wins wars, Vorthak said, though he found himself defensive in a way he couldn't quite explain. Absolutely. Organization, documentation, systematic approach to problem solving. Valdez made a correction to a student's essay on asymmetric warfare theory. We humans tend to be less methodical. How so? Valdez glanced up, her expression holding something that might have been amusement. Well, when we had our one battle, we didn't bother keeping detailed records. No tactical analyses, no casualty reports, no strategic assessments. We just solved the problem. The reception hall had grown quiet again, but this time the silence carried a different quality. Several of the alien dignitaries exchanged glances, though none seemed quite sure what they were witnessing. What kind of problem requires an entire species' military to solve? asked Commander Helix. The kind that only comes up once, Valdez replied, returning to her grading with the same methodical attention she had shown throughout the conversation. Vorthak's mandibles clicked rapidly against his titanium replacement, a sound his species made when processing contradictory data. Something about the human's casual dismissal of his achievements had shifted from annoying to genuinely puzzling. Her tone suggested neither mockery nor ignorance, but rather the kind of disinterest that came from dealing with fundamentally different scales of reference. Perhaps, he said carefully, you could elaborate on this singular engagement of yours? Valdez looked up one final time, her expression as neutral as ever. Oh, I'm sure it wouldn't interest someone with your extensive experience. After all, what's one battle compared to 1,000? And with that, she returned to her papers, leaving Vorthak and the assembled dignitaries with the uncomfortable feeling that they had just missed something important, though none of them could quite articulate what. 3 days of sleepless tactical analysis had failed to resolve Vorthak's dilemma. His battle computer could simulate 17 different scenarios for challenging Professor Valdez to formal combat, but none of them accounted for her peculiar indifference to his reputation, which was why he now stood before her office door, mandibles clicking nervously as he prepared to demand satisfaction. The door chimed his arrival, then slid open to reveal organized chaos. Valdez's workspace resembled an archaeological dig site more than a military instructor's office. Ancient projectile weapons hung on the walls alongside primitive bladed implements, while her desk groaned under stacks of what appeared to be physical books, actual paper and binding, like some museum exhibit. Professor, he began, then stopped short at the sight of her current reading material. Commander, she replied, without looking up from a leather-bound volume titled The Art of War. I wondered when you'd stop by. You were expecting me? Statistical probability, warrior culture, public embarrassment, 3 days to stew in wounded pride. Valdez turned a page with practiced ease. Though I admit, most visitors are more interested in my collection than formal dueling protocols. Vorthak found his attention drawn, despite himself, to the bizarre assemblage of primitive weaponry. These are historical artifacts? Working replicas, mostly. The originals are too valuable to display. She gestured toward a curved blade mounted behind her desk. That's a katana, samurai sword from pre-spaceflight Japan. Folded steel, edge geometry optimized for cutting through organic armor. Organic armor? Humans fighting humans. We had to get creative. Vorthak's optical sensors focused on the weapon with professional interest. The craftsmanship was undeniably elegant, though he couldn't fathom why any species would develop such elaborate tools for intraspecies conflict. Your people fought each other before joining galactic civilization? Extensively. Valdez finally looked up from her book. Would you like some tea? You look confused, and confusion is easier to process with caffeine. Yes, thank you. As Valdez busied herself with an ancient-looking brewing apparatus, Vorthak examined the other artifacts. A projectile weapon labeled M1 Garand shared wall space with something called a trench knife, while a glass case contained what appeared to be miniature explosive devices marked hand grenades. These are all human designs? He asked. Oh, yes, though these represent fairly primitive examples. Valdez handed him a steaming cup. We got much more sophisticated later. More sophisticated than explosive projectiles? Well, consider the engineering challenges. How do you effectively eliminate large numbers of your own species when they're using similar technology and understand your tactical thinking? Vorthak nearly dropped his tea. Eliminate large numbers? Arms races tend toward escalation. Nuclear weapons, biological agents, chemical warfare, orbital bombardment platforms. Valdez spoke with the same casual tone she might use to discuss the weather. Each innovation prompted counter-innovations, which prompted counter-counter-innovations, and so forth. But why? Resources, ideology, territorial disputes, religious differences, ethnic rivalries. She ticked off reasons on her fingers. Sometimes just because we could. Humans have always been remarkably inventive when it comes to finding excuses for violence. Vorthak set down his cup with trembling primary limbs. His battle computer was struggling to process casualty estimates for a species that had weaponized everything from diseases to orbital mechanics against itself. How many conflicts? Oh, thousands, possibly tens of thousands, depending on how you classify regional disputes versus full-scale wars. Valdez consulted another ancient volume. The 20th century alone saw 2 global conflicts involving over 100 nations each. Global? Entire planetary surface, every continent, most major population centers, total industrial mobilization. She turned to a page showing grainy photographs of devastated cities. We got quite good at destroying our own infrastructure. Vorthak's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely, a sign of complete cognitive paralysis in his species. Casualty figures? Rough estimates? The 2 major global wars killed somewhere between 70 and 80 million people. Though that doesn't count the smaller conflicts, civil wars, genocides, or what we politely call police actions. 80 million, Vorthak's voice emerged as barely a whisper. In 2 wars. 2 wars spanning roughly 6 years of total duration, Valdez clarified helpfully. We had gotten remarkably efficient by that point. Efficient? Industrial warfare. Assembly line production of munitions, strategic bombing campaigns, mechanized infantry formations, coordinated air-sea-land operations. She pulled another book from the pile. This covers the Eastern Front, 27 million casualties in a single theater of operations. Vorthak's battle computer finally managed to complete its analysis, and the results left him speechless. His proudest achievement, the elimination of 47,000 enemies in a single engagement, would barely qualify as a minor skirmish by human historical standards. But surely, he managed, these were aberrations? Primitive conflicts from your pre-technological period? Oh no, we kept improving right up until the end? Valdez smiled with what might have been fondness. Nuclear weapons could eliminate entire cities in minutes. Biological warfare could depopulate continents. We had orbital platforms capable of redirecting asteroids for kinetic bombardment. The end? Of human warfare. We eventually decided to stop. Decided? Policy decision. Unanimous, really, once we understood what we were capable of. Valdez closed the book and regarded Vorthak with the same neutral expression she had worn at the reception. Which brings us back to your original question about my combat experience. Your single battle, Vorthak said weakly. The last one. The engagement that convinced our entire species to abandon warfare as an institution. What happened? Valdez stood and moved to her window, gazing out at the peaceful commercial traffic flowing past Meridian Point. We discovered that winning isn't the same as surviving, and survival requires different skills than conquest. I don't understand. You catalog victories, Commander. We cataloged extinction scenarios. She turned back to face him. When your 1,000 battles become a statistical footnote in someone else's strategic planning, you begin to reconsider the nature of success. Vorthak found himself backing towards the door, his warrior's instincts finally recognizing a threat his conscious mind couldn't quite process. I should go. Of course. Though if you're still interested in that formal challenge, I should mention, my office hours are posted on the door. As the portal sealed behind him, Vorthak realized he no longer had any desire to fight Professor Valdez. In fact, he was beginning to suspect that challenging her might qualify as the kind of strategic miscalculation that had historically proven fatal for her species' enemies. The troubling part was that she seemed to know it too. Station Administrator Keel Noth had overseen Meridian Point's data systems for 43 standard years without encountering a request that made his respiratory slits constrict with dread. That streak ended when Vorthak arrived at the Central Archive, demanding full access to Earth's military records. "Absolutely not," Keel Noth wheezed, his ceremonial robes rustling with agitation. "Diplomatic protocols explicitly forbid—" "On what grounds?" interrupted Admiral Zareth, her crystalline features reflecting the archive's holographic displays. "Military records are standard reference material for tactical instruction." "Standard records, yes. Earth's files carry special classification codes." Commander Helix leaned forward in his mobility chair, metallic appendages clicking against the armrests. "Special how?" Keel Noth's respiratory slits fluttered, a nervous habit that had intensified dramatically over the past 20 minutes of increasingly heated discussion. Certain diplomatic sensitivities require discretionary handling of Terran historical data. "Meaning?" Vorthak's mandibles spread in aggressive anticipation. "Meaning I need authorization from at least 3 council members before accessing those files." The assembled military officers exchanged glances. In 4 decades of galactic cooperation, no species had ever required council permission for basic historical research. The implications hung in the air like an undetonated weapon. "Get them," Admiral Zareth said flatly. 2 hours later, the archive's main chamber hosted an impromptu diplomatic crisis. Council representatives from 6 major species crowded around the central database terminal, arguing in overlapping languages while Keel Noth frantically consulted regulation manuals. "This is completely unprecedented," declared Ambassador Thexval, her insectoid features twitching with irritation. "Military histories are public documentation." "Not these files," wheezed Councillor Rexmore, his bulbous form quivering with what might have been fear. "Trust me, colleagues, some knowledge carries prices too steep for casual curiosity." "Superstitious nonsense," scoffed Captain Vexhigh. "Data is data. Classification systems exist to protect current operational secrets, not ancient history." Keel Noth cleared his respiratory chambers with a sound like escaping steam. "Perhaps we could review selected excerpts? Sanitized summaries of key engagements?" "No summaries," Vorthak said firmly. "Complete records." "Professor Valdez claims her species fought only one significant military engagement. I want to see documentation of this singular battle." An uncomfortable silence settled over the chamber. Finally, Councillor Rexmore spoke in tones usually reserved for funeral ceremonies. "Very well. But understand? You requested this information against explicit warnings. The consequences rest entirely on your collective judgment." The main display flickered to life, revealing Earth's military database index. What should have been a straightforward catalog of conflicts instead resembled a redacted nightmare. Classification codes marked nearly every entry: diplomatic sensitivity, cultural protection, protocol, psychological hazard warning, restricted dissemination. Psychological hazard. Admiral Zareth's voice carried genuine confusion. For historical records. Some truths prove unsettling to warrior cultures, Keel Noth admitted reluctantly, particularly those who define themselves through military prowess. Vorthak activated the first available file. Terran Conflict Resolution, Final Phase, Executive Summary. The document opened with standard diplomatic language, but within paragraphs, the clinical terminology couldn't disguise the underlying horror. Casualty projections in the hundreds of millions, atmospheric ignition scenarios, orbital bombardment calculations, extinction probability matrices. "This can't be accurate," Commander Helix protested. "These numbers describe planetary annihilation, not military engagement." "Keep reading," suggested Counselor Rexmore grimly. The next section detailed weapons systems that defied conventional understanding. Planet crackers, stellar ignition devices, self-replicating warheads, consciousness transfer assassination protocols. Each innovation carried footnotes explaining how humans had tested these technologies against themselves during what they euphemistically termed research and development phases. They used these weapons? Admiral Zareth's crystalline structure had dimmed noticeably. Against their own population? Limited deployment, Keelnoth confirmed, mostly on uninhabited regions, though the casualty figures from the inhabited test sites. He gestured helplessly at the scrolling data. Vorthak forced himself to continue reading, his battle computer struggling to process strategic doctrine that treated entire star systems as acceptable losses. The humans had developed contingency plans for scenarios ranging from lunar detonation to solar destabilization, each outlined with the methodical precision of species that had genuinely considered every possible way to eliminate themselves. But why? Captain Vexhai's voice cracked with disbelief. What possible strategic objective justifies these extremes? Victory conditions appear comprehensive, Vorthak managed. Total elimination of opposing forces, supporting infrastructure, population centers, and potential recovery capabilities. That's not warfare, Admiral Zareth whispered. That's extinction event management. The database continued revealing horrors disguised as tactical innovations. Humans had weaponized mathematics itself, creating logical paradoxes that could crash enemy AI systems. They had developed mimetic warfare, ideas so perfectly crafted that simply thinking about them could drive hostile populations to madness or suicide. They had built weapons that existed in 11 dimensions, attacking targets through geometric spaces that most species couldn't even perceive. "The final engagement," Vorthak said hoarsely. "Where is the documentation for their last battle?" Keelnoth's respiratory slits sealed completely, a physiological response his species exhibited only under extreme stress. That file carries the highest classification level in galactic diplomatic history. "Show us." The display flickered again, revealing a single document. Operation Tabula Rasa, termination protocols, implemented, redacted, status, completed. The file contained no tactical analyses, no casualty reports, no strategic assessments. Instead, a brief summary in standard diplomatic language. Terran military assets consolidated and neutralized per species-wide consensus. All weapon systems deactivated, dismantled, or placed under permanent containment. Military research discontinued. Warrior caste dissolved. Conflict resolution protocols reclassified to diplomatic/academic disciplines only. "That's all?" Vorthak demanded. "No battle details? No engagement records?" "There were no survivors to file reports," Counselor Rexmore said quietly. "On either side." "What sides? Who were they fighting?" The silence stretched until Keelnoth finally answered. Themselves. The final human war was humanity versus humanity. The winners decided that winning wasn't worth the price. And the losers? Well, there weren't any losers. Because there wasn't anyone left to lose. Vorthak stared at the terminal, his 1,000 catalogued victories suddenly seeming as insignificant as children's games. They eliminated their entire military establishment. "They eliminated the concept of military solutions," Admiral Zareth said, her voice hollow. "Every weapon, every strategy, every tactical innovation, gone. Not hidden, not stored, not kept as emergency reserves, completely eradicated." "And Professor Valdez?" "Was there," Keelnoth confirmed. One of the few who lived through the implementation phase. One of the architects who designed humanity's transition from the galaxy's most dangerous military force to... He gestured vaguely. To what? To the species that teaches our children how to resolve conflicts without bloodshed, because they're the only ones who truly understand the alternative. As the assembled officers filed out of the archive chamber, each carrying the weight of knowledge they couldn't unknow, Vorthak remained at the terminal. His battle computer ran probability calculations over and over, but the mathematics remained unchanged. He had challenged someone who had helped eliminate an entire civilization's capacity for warfare. The truly terrifying part was that she had done it successfully. The graduation hall stood empty now, except for scattered chairs and the lingering scent of ceremonial incense from a dozen different worlds. Vorthak found Professor Valdez exactly where he had left her 3 days earlier, at the same corner table, grading the same stack of papers with mechanical precision. "I expected you back sooner," she said, without looking up. "Most warrior cultures crack after the first classified file. You knew what I would find. I helped write some of those reports." Valdez made a correction to a student's essay on resource allocation during siege warfare. Though I noticed they redacted my personal assessments. Probably for the best. I wasn't particularly diplomatic in my conclusions. Vorthak lowered himself into the chair across from her, his exoskeleton creaking with fatigue. "Tell me about the final war." "Which part? The strategic overview? The tactical innovations? The aftermath management?" Valdez finished marking the current paper and moved to the next. "Be specific. I've had 70 years to develop talking points." "Why did you stop?" "Ah, the philosophical question." She set down her stylus and gave him her complete attention. "Do you know what separates professional soldiers from warriors, Commander?" "Enlighten me." "Warriors fight for glory, honor, victory, abstract concepts that justify the means through the ends. Professional soldiers fight for objectives. When those objectives become mathematically impossible to achieve, professionals adapt their methods." "What objective?" "Species survival." Turned out that our military innovations had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. We had become more dangerous to ourselves than any external threat could possibly be. Vorthak's mandibles remained motionless. The weapons in those files could sterilize galaxies, yes, but the real problem wasn't the weapons themselves. It was our facility for using them. We had optimized warfare to the point where any conflict, regardless of initial scope, would inevitably escalate to extinction-level engagement. So you eliminated your military. We eliminated the possibility of military solutions. Valdez pulled a different paper from her stack. This one covered in complex mathematical formulae. One of my current students, actually. Zephyrian, third-year tactical studies. She's trying to calculate optimal force deployment for asteroid belt mining operations. Mining operations? Resource extraction requires the same logistical planning as military campaigns, same mathematical principles, same organizational structures, same efficiency optimization. Valdez pointed to a particularly elegant equation. The difference is that mining operations improve living conditions rather than ending them. You redirected your strategic capabilities toward civilian applications. We redirected our strategic capabilities toward survival applications, building instead of destroying, exploring instead of conquering, learning instead of defeating. She made another notation on the student's work. Much more challenging, actually. Anyone can eliminate a problem through sufficient application of force. Solving problems while keeping everyone alive requires genuine creativity. Vorthak processed this information with growing unease. But you maintained the knowledge. The tactical understanding, the strategic thinking, you still teach military science. We teach military history and strategic analysis because those skills transfer beautifully to other disciplines: urban planning, disaster response, resource management, diplomatic negotiation. Valdez gestured around the empty hall. This academy exists because we discovered that warrior cultures could learn non-military applications for their existing talents. And if threats emerge, external aggressors? Haven't yet. Turns out that most species capable of interstellar warfare are also capable of recognizing when they're outclassed. Valdez smiled with what might have been amusement. Though I suppose you've noticed that humans hold advisory positions in most galactic military organizations. You're consultants. We're insurance policies. Our presence in command structures serves as a reminder that conflicts always have alternatives to escalation. Vorthak felt something that might have been relief, though he couldn't quite identify why. So humanity isn't actually pacifist. Oh, we're absolutely pacifist. We just happen to be very, very good at it. Valdez returned to her grading with renewed focus. Pacifism isn't passive, Commander. It's active conflict prevention through superior strategic planning. Superior to what? To warfare. Fighting is what you do when you've failed to achieve your objectives through better methods. She marked another correction. We spent several thousand years perfecting warfare, and it nearly killed us. So we spent the next several thousand years perfecting everything else. Everything else? Diplomacy, economic theory, psychological manipulation, social engineering, cultural integration, technological advancement, resource optimization. Valdez ticked off categories on her fingers. All the tools that make warfare unnecessary by eliminating the conditions that create conflict. Vorthak stared at the human professor, finally understanding why her casual dismissal of his achievements had unsettled him so profoundly. You don't fight because you don't need to fight. We don't fight because we've become too good at it. There's a difference. Valdez completed her current paper and moved to the next. When your tactical capabilities reach the point where any engagement becomes mutually assured extinction, you have two choices: perfect your weapons, or perfect your diplomacy. And you chose diplomacy. We chose survival. Diplomacy was simply the most effective tool for that objective. Vorthak rose from his chair, his 1,000 catalogued victories now feeling like ancient history from someone else's life. I came here to challenge you to combat. I know. I won't. I know that too. Because you're too dangerous to fight. Valdez looked up one final time, her expression holding the same neutral assessment that had marked their entire interaction. No, Commander. Because you're too intelligent to fight someone who's already won. As Vorthak left the graduation hall, he realized that Professor Valdez had been correct about warrior cultures adapting to new strategic realities. He would return to his ship, cancel his remaining speaking engagements, and begin studying human diplomatic techniques. After all, any species capable of defeating warfare itself was clearly worth learning from. Behind him, Valdez continued grading papers with the methodical precision of someone who had successfully solved the galaxy's most persistent problem, and now spent her time teaching others how to avoid creating it again.